All right, I think we might begin then. Well, today is the day on which we're going to host Michelle Henderson here, who is principal at our own consulting company. Michelle is going to talk to us about uncertainty in the industry associated with earth science. And it's a rather timely talk because the last few years have seen quite a lot of tumult in the earth science industry in general. Oil and gas prices have, done all kinds of very interesting fluctuations, and there's been COVID, and the world's been hit with this pandemic, and there's all this uncertainty. So I think Michelle has come to us from a professional consulting background, where for many years she's been working with leadership and change. She's no stranger to GA. And she combines her passion for leadership and innovation, working with senior leaders to help them manage their teams in constantly changing environments. And Michelle has a deep understanding of how important science infrastructure is for advancing Australia's resource wealth, which is very in line with GA Strategy 2028. And Michelle is well qualified to be talking about these matters because, in addition to her experience, she has postgraduate qualifications in management, strategy in particular, and vocational qualifications in training and development. And with that, I will do a few housekeeping slides because none of this, presentation or getting of highly qualified panel members to talk would be possible without the Australian Society of Exploration Geophysicists corporate members, such as you see over here: Down Under Geophysics, Transparent Earth, Santos, Southern Geoscience, ValSeis, Total, Seismic, HiSeis. And then there's also the South Australia and Northern Territory branch sponsors, Western Australia, New South Wales. And I know we're a small branch in the ACT, but we are well represented nationally because this talk is being broadcast nationally. And so we're, there's all kinds of reasons as to why you should be interested in the goings on of the ASEG. Just a little bit of etiquette today. If you have to ask a question, we've got Phil Wynn online, who has kindly volunteered to monitor the chat. And so just click on the Q&A button, and you should be able to ask your questions. And so a little bit of a spiel as to why, if you are a young professional in the geosciences associated with geophysics, why you should be signing up to be a member of the ASEG. You will get free access to Exploration Geophysics, which is a fairly high quality research journal. You will also get Preview, which tells us a lot about what's going on with the latest and greatest data sets that are being collected by GA or other companies, and what's going on in the exploration world at a very current state. There's the Australasian Exploration Geoscience Conference, to which you get reduced entry. You get up-to-date notifications on technical events in your state. Job advertisements are posted on the ASEG website. There's also a wine offer, which is not to be looked down on. There's also social events, and in this time when there's a lot of uncertainty, I think the best we can all do is get together. So I think the ASEG provides a great platform from which you can foster your professional network, and it's great for students who are starting out who might not know what they've gotten themselves into. There's as many networking opportunities, and there's all kinds of travel grants to conferences, and you never stop learning. So even if you've retired and you're still interested in the geosciences, there's all kinds of opportunities you can avail of. This is how you can keep in touch. There's some extremely nice technical talks you can find on the ASEG's YouTube videos, as well as other non-technical but very relevant talks like the one Michelle's about to give you today. And with that, I will hand over to Michelle.
Thank you, Anand. Now, I'm just hoping that everybody can see me well. Hello, everybody that's here. It is such a delight to see people face to face. I really appreciate you making the effort, and a very big welcome to everybody who's at the end of their computers and watching this through the video stream. Thank you very deeply for inviting me to come and have this conversation with you all today. As Amanda said, I have a little bit of experience in these fields, and I certainly have a close connection with GA, not in any scientific way, I might hasten to add, but because of work that I have, to my great pleasure, being able to do. So it is a great pleasure to be here with you today, and I welcome you. As we commence this afternoon, in the ACT, as I commence this afternoon, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land upon which we're meeting. Here in this region, they are the Ngunnawal people, and I most certainly extend my respects to their elders past and present. I also extend my respects to the elders of the countries in which you might be viewing this webinar this afternoon. All right, we're going to speak about managing through constant change and uncertainty. And in doing that, we're going to be looking at the people aspects and the areas of science we're going to delve into this afternoon are areas to do with neuroscience. We're going to have a little bit of a look at what happens when people are in this state of ongoing change. So what happens to yourself? What happens to those around you, and as leaders or as aspiring leaders in this field, what is it that you're able to do to help yourself and others through the change? The topics we're going to cover this afternoon, and we only have about 20 minutes, so it's a little bit of a taster, I suppose. We're just going to remind you all of the uncertain operating environment within which you operate, but I'm pretty sure that you don't need any spoken reminder, but we'll do it anyway. We're going to talk then about people's reactions to change, what happens when we're in change environments, and when change is constant, what that means for the way that we perform in our professional relationships. Also sometimes in our personal. We're going to talk a little bit at, well, what can you do? This is the environment within which you conduct your business. It's unlikely to change. So what do you do? What do you do when you're leading others through, or you aspire to lead others through, or if you are looking to influence within this particular work environment? And of course, we'll finish with a little bit around resilience. Now, I'm super used to lots and lots of interaction, which I understand is probably not what's going to happen today. But please, if you have questions, pop them in the chat. If for the people that are here, if you have any questions, please let me know. The moderator will be having a look at the chat and will be letting me know some way, maybe a little bit through magic, but will be letting me know the questions that you have. I would encourage you to do that. I really love the interaction, even if you're just interacting to let me know. Come on, hurry it up, Michelle. All right, let's get on with your uncertain environments. I don't need to speak very much about this. So my goodness gracious me, the resources sector in Australia is really a powerhouse sector, isn't it? Pun not really intended, but a little bit. So it certainly is, like it's a storming sector for the wellbeing and economic growth of Australians. So the resources sector contributes 10% to GDP. It employs almost 260,000 people in Australia and overseas. It exports so half of the total of all of Australian exports. So 50% of all Australian exports comes from the resources sector, and it produces 6 out of the top 10 goods of Australia. So indeed a tremendously important sector, and I might mention here that thanks to the price of iron ore, it's providing a nice little buffer for us as we try and sort out our trade relations with China. Tremendously important to Australia, and none of that would happen without the work of you, exploration geophysicists. Without your work, we wouldn't be seeing the benefits from the resources sector that we do. So your discovery work, the data sets that you provide, the exploration frameworks that come out of your work, all provide a foundation for the successful performance of the industry sector. So please don't ever underestimate the value of your work to, well, certainly to broader Australian wellbeing. And I suppose that's why the government seeks to fund such important research organisations and science organisations. So you're a vital input to the resources sector, which, as we know, drives drives growth for Australia. It is, and you operate in a very uncertain environment because you're so closely linked to that resources sector, a sector which is entirely cyclical and highly volatile. You work in organisations. If you're working for organisations that are funded through governments or other academic institutions, there is generally a little bit of uncertainty around funding, where the priorities are going to change. I often hear the expression around goalposts changing. So you think you're headed in the right direction, all of a sudden somebody has a good idea about doing something else. All of this creates environments that are unsettling in the least, and downright discombobulating. And the more and more that you work in this environment, the more fatiguing and sometimes anxiety producing it can be. We're going to have a look in just a minute about why this is the case. But one of the things we're going to have a look at is how important certainty is to human beings. So regardless of your youth, because I can remember being young and saying, bring it on, you know, I worked in the government, I used to kind of wish for machinery of government changes, so bring it on, give me change. But even the most youthful out there, even the people out there who are most embracing of change, there are elements of certainty that as human beings, reasons we're going to have a look at, are absolutely central to our well-being, the way that we think about ourselves and the way that we organise ourselves. So when that sense of certainty is disrupted, and it's disrupted on an ongoing basis, it makes it increasingly difficult to perform at your best. So we're going to have a look at how you can help yourself perform at your best and make sure that those around you do the same. All right, so let's see what happens. Reactions to change, we're going to have a little bit of a look at. What happens when things change? Now, in this next piece that I'm going to show you, I'm not necessarily talking about ongoing change. This is just what happens when things change to human beings. All right, so on the screen there, you will see entirely biologically accurate depictions of the brain. Actually, that's not true. They're just kind of cartoon drawings, but they're useful for the purpose that I'd like to speak about today. So one of the interesting things, this work is drawn from an area of neuroscience, which I understand if you watch The Big Bang Theory, Sheldon totally discredits, but let's put that aside. So it comes from the area of neuroscience, and what neuroscientists look at is the way the different parts of the brain interact and cause human beings to react and think and speak in certain ways. And it's very interesting because there are many things that we do and say as human beings that are driven from parts of our brain that have been around for a long time and are there to keep us safe. And sometimes the behaviours that we display when we're acting off the impulses from those parts of our brain are actions that can really prevent us from being our best, particularly in work environments. So one of the things that neuroscientists have discovered and brought to life by a fellow called David Rock, he has authored lots of research, lots of books in this particular area. One of the things that he drew out from the work of neuroscientists is that in office environments, in work environments, people react the same way to change as if they were being physically threatened. So as if you were in an environment where you were uncertain and you thought that there was a potential of being hurt. In offices, in workplaces, in areas, now I know this isn't the case for many of you who go out on the field, but sometimes, you know, when my greatest physical danger would be a paper cut. Change, the prospect of change will cause me to react in my head as if I was facing a physical threat. And what your brain does in the limbic system, and the limbic system is all about emotions, does a lot of decision making, it's connected to that part of your brain that has the flight and fight response in it. What your limbic brain says when you're confronting change is, don't do it. this is a threat. We want to move away from the change. That's what the little coloured splashes are trying to depict on the image of the brain on the left-hand side of that diagram. What it's trying to depict is that we're being asked to, your brain is sending really strong messages to you to not engage with the change because it's perceiving it as a threat. The depiction of the brain on the right-hand side has that green oval in a different part of the brain, and what that is trying to represent is your neocortex, or your new brain, the frontal lobe, that part of your brain that is responsible for reasoning, critical thinking, innovation, and risk-taking comes from there as well too. So if you can engage that part of your brain, if you can engage those around you, to do some critical reasoning, to do maybe a little bit of logical, critical risk assessment, then it helps people's responses to change. It helps them bring in a more critical part of their brain to kind of quieten down those other words, those other responses that are saying this is not a good place to be. So at the end of the day, if you're leading people through change, what you're trying to encourage people to do is to view the change state as a better state. Now, if you're thinking there and saying, yeah, but it's not a better state, they just keep moving the goalposts on me, you still need to bring in that other part of your brain to try and understand why the goalposts are changing, to try and see what you can make with the rules as they change, to understand a little bit perhaps around why senior decision makers are making the change that they do. If you don't bring in that part of your brain, then your limbic brain will continue to fire in the way that's displayed on the left-hand side depiction, and you get that sort of disengaged, unconstructive behaviour around change. The other thing that David Rock, who tells us about the way that we respond to change, says to us, is that particularly in workplaces, in the ways that Western societies organise themselves, there are 5 things in particular which, if we think they are going to be impacted by the change, we will see as a threat. And it's called the SCARF model. That's an acronym, or an acrostic maybe. So let me go through. So it's these 5 things. It's a model, 5 things, easy to remember. Really important to keep in mind while you're managing yourself and those feelings of anxiety through change, and while you're leading others through change as well. So the S stands for status. Status is about your reputation, your good reputation that you think will be negatively impacted while you're changing. You might be very good at something. You might be seen as the go-to person, the expert. Maybe the thing that's being asked of you makes you not the expert, or it makes you uncertain, or you have to research a little bit more. If you feel that your status is, for some people, that's the other thing to say, is that not all 5 of these are at play in every person, but some of them will be at play in every person. So if I feel that my status will be in some way diminished, I don't want to engage in the change, and I might be downright obstructive about it. Certainty, tremendously important. So it's a bit of a, it's almost redundant to have to say, well, I don't feel certain because it's changed. Nobody much feels certainty when there's change. So this is really important, isn't it? If that's the case, we are really very driven around certainty. Change causes us to be uncertainty in everybody. There will be an element of not wanting to engage in the change because I don't know. Remember what your limbic brain is saying? I don't know if I can keep myself safe in this new environment. Autonomy. Human beings absolutely tremendously driven to being self-determining. We are built to be self-determining. I think that is also about keeping us safe so we can make our own decisions. But whether or not that's the case, what I can tell you is that we are driven to be autonomous. Now, I don't mean autonomous as in alone, but I do mean we are able to make decisions for ourselves and act on the decisions that we're making. Highly driven to be autonomous. So given that, just as a little bit of an aside, if I'm ever running workshops on motivations in workplaces, when I do that exercise, it says, what are the top 3 things that demotivate you in a workplace? What do you reckon is the number one every single time? It's being micromanaged. Every single time being micromanaged. So it doesn't matter what level people are, from the most senior to those to emerging managers, this issue of being micromanaged comes up as the top demotivator. And I think that's because we're driven to be autonomous. We want to be guided, we want to engage with other people, but we are built to be self-determining, which I must remember when I go home to my 16-year-old boy. Anyway, the R in SCARF stands for relatedness. That's a fancy word for connections. We want to be connected. I think they used relatedness so they could make SCARF, but I don't know. Relatedness is about connections. We are also driven to be connected. We are, even those of you that say, you know what, if I never see another person for the rest of my life, I'll be fine. Actually, that's kind of not true. You do need we do all need connections with other people, maybe not thousands of people, but we need to feel connected. So if you feel that your connections are somehow going to diminish, you're not going to be working with the same people, your stakeholders change, you don't think you're going to just quite have the influence that you might normally have, then that will appear to you as a threat. And the F in SCARF is fairness. Do I perceive that what is happening is fair? The difficulty, of course, with fairness, if you are leading people through change, is that fairness is entirely subjective to that person. So working with that person to understand to what degree the change is fair, what's making them think it's fair or otherwise, can sometimes take a little bit of unwinding. But particularly, when goalposts change, you might not be involved in the consultation, other decisions are being made. For some people, there will be quite a sense of it's not fair. So 2 things. We react to changes if it was a physical threat. We will move away from it because of our limbic brain responses. You need to bring in some critical thinking and some self-awareness. Limbic brain's not very self-aware, and some self-awareness to help yourself and others through change. It is likely that if you are anxious about the change and if others are, kind of not really getting on board, they will be feeling threatened in one or more of these 5 areas. So this is what you see when people go through change, isn't it? All right, there might be a bit of shock, denial, going through all of the angst. Why does this always keep happening? We've been through the mulberry bush before. I just can't, I'm not doing it. That's it, I'm over, I've done too old and cranky for doing this. Then you go, well, maybe it's worth looking at acceptance and commitment. In fancier models than this, that end commitment is called benefits realisation. So understanding this, so combined with those other things that we know now about how human beings react to change, this is a bit of a model of the feelings that people feel and you might see being expressed in change. And if you're in a world of constant change, it could actually be that you and the people that you work with don't ever actually get to that yay commitment, benefits realisation phase, because by the time you've kind of got up, you're up towards that the upward trajectory, another change has come. So you come down again. So being really aware of this model, keeping an eye on your own people and yourself, because these are difficult emotions on that left-hand side, the downward trajectory. And if you're not actually getting that ability to come back up, to celebrate a little, to explore and kind of, revel in the discovery. I know that's a Pollyanna thing to say because sometimes the change is really very difficult. But if you're not given that opportunity to come to terms with the change before you hit the next one, then you really become stuck in a whole bunch of these negative emotions. The other thing about the way that this is, these emotions that we experience through change is presented is that it kind of looks like it's a bit you go from one to the next, but that's not what happens, is it, in real life? So you might get a bit of a shock, and then depending on how, enlivened you're feeling, you might go straight to exploration. So you might go, oh, didn't expect that, but let's go and explore. You might explore a bit and go, yeah, nah. Okay, now I'm really threatened. I'm all the way back here to frustrated. So that's the other thing to recognise. This model simplifies so that you get a bit of an understanding of how people are progressing and how your own feelings are progressing through the change. So you need to be aware, and we're going to be looking at some strategies around, well, what do you do? What do you do in this kind of broiling hot pot of change that never seems to help you get out of the those more negative emotions? So what to do? Let's have another look at something that our friend David Rock says. And it's this first point that I want to land on. And it says he says the brain experiences the workplace first and foremost as a social system. So let me give you a little bit of context around that. The earlier part of this paragraph from David Rock, he says in Western societies, we set up our workplaces as areas of exchange. So we come in and we exchange labour for remuneration or benefits. So we come in, we work, we get a benefit, we leave. We come in, we work, we get a benefit, we leave. So we're really just products of economic activity. So we come in, but we're rewarded. Maybe not so well, maybe very well for the work that we do. So we come in and we're rewarded. The problem with that is that's not how our brain sees the workplace. So you're coming in saying, well, I'm just going to exchange my labour, that's it, shut down the brain except for the important sciencey bits. I'm just going to come and exchange my labour and then I'll get some sort of benefit and then I'll go away. But that's not how the brain works. The brain sees it first and foremost as a social system, which means that for young Michelle, back when, before, I had a husband and mortgage and children and, and life was, I suppose, fairly cruisy, I had the thought that people should be able to come to work, leave their garbage at the front door and pick it up again on the way out and not bring it into work. And I probably wasn't very good a manager back in those days because I could not understand why people didn't do that. I've had a little bit more life experience since then and I've read a little bit more. And the reason people don't do that is because our brains don't perceive workplaces as simply an area where that accommodates an exchange, particularly an economic exchange. What does that mean when you're working in constantly changing environments? It means that saying things like, or even thinking things like, we just have to get on with it. Just buck up. Oh, get over it. We're just going to move on. Can you not move on? That's what we were doing 6 months ago. Those things don't work. And they don't work for this reason, because our brains don't see our workplaces as just a place where we exchange our units, our work and labour for compensation. And they don't work because we're feeling physically threatened by the change. So that means of you that if you're leading, when you're leading people, that you need to bring your self-awareness, all of those tools, all of those good leadership tools to the fore to help yourself and others through that. That doesn't necessarily mean that you can't be doing these things quickly. No, what was the word? The word of last year was pivot, wasn't it? Did you all pivot? Are you still pivoting? I'm kind of a pivot anyway. So I'm just having a laugh. It's a very fine word, pivot, but yes, enough pivoting was done last year. But that agility of thinking, this awareness of what's happening with people helps you in these fast-paced environments where change happens all the time. So please remember that. Please remember there are really good reasons why, unlike the way the young Michelle used to think, people can't just leave whatever's going on for them at the door. Have a think about it. So now we're in the realm of what can you do? You understand now. You're understanding a little bit more about what's happening with people through change. Dan Pink, another guy who draws heavily on the work of neuroscience, and he's got this very interesting a very interesting clip about the surprising truth about what motivates us. And when you go through that, he says, human beings, there's 3 aspects to the things that above and beyond motivate human beings. They are purpose, autonomy, and mastery. Look, there's that word autonomy again. So for yourself, you need to be trying to make some sense of the change. That might mean asking questions. That will definitely mean advocating for your teams. It will mean communicating that purpose to those around you. It will mean trying to reframe. So if something has happened and it doesn't really make a lot of sense, trying to reframe, finding what will make sense out of it for you and those that you lead. Autonomy, give people the ability to explore what's it going to be like there. Am I going to be able to do it? Be on the alert for what kind of skills development they might need in order to be successful in that change state. Don't expect people just to be able to do it like that, but give them time to explore, to make mistakes and not feel criticised. Mastery. We all really want to be good at what we do. We all do. If you're thinking at this moment of people that you've worked with in the past who don't look like they want to be good at what they're doing, that will absolutely be because they have been poorly managed in the past. And we can take that up as a discussion at another time. We want to be good at what we're doing. So give yourself and those that you lead, when you're going through change, give them the opportunity to be good at it. Give them the opportunity perhaps to start predicting how the change will happen. Give them the opportunity to talk to you about, if I do this, then I'm going to feel okay about working in these changed environments. Very strong motivators. Now, remuneration and workplace benefits are also motivators as well. But at the core, when I ask people about what motivates them, this sense of feeling purposeful, feeling valued, always at the top. Remember this as you and people go through change, because they're the times when we feel least valued, least purposeful, least sure. Circles of influence and control. This won't be at all a surprise, I don't think, to anybody who's watching. Lots and lots of work around this idea of circles of control, influence, and concern. Just really briefly, I'm showing this to you as another tool that might help in the conversations that you have with those that you lead, and also when you're thinking about yourself. So the circle of concern, in that shaded grey place, it's called the circle of concern. These are the things that take up most of our worry time. It takes up about 80% of the things that we worry about, and when things are uncertain and when things are changing. And interestingly, the things that fall into the circle of concern for us are generally things we have no control over. So if you and your team members are focusing heaps on these things that you don't have control over, then it's not a very productive way of thinking. It does cause greater anxiety, it certainly increases stress levels, and it leaves you with this feeling that you can't do anything about what's happening. And that's really not really the case. I'm going to jump now to the circle of control. So it's the circle of control where you want to start thinking and speaking with your team and your colleagues about what is it in this situation that you can control. So take your energies from the circle of concern to the circle of control. Start to think about those things that you can control. Now let me ask, what are the things that you can control? If there is nothing else that you can do, what are the things that you can control? Exercise. Yes, you can control exercise, so you can control how you look after yourself. That's right, you can control your language. You can always control your behaviours and your reactions. And even if they are the only things that you have within your control, then that's the place to start. And as you do that, as you realise that you can control that, if you bring some self-awareness into play, if you bring that new brain into play to kind of quiet your limbic responses, then a really interesting thing happens. And this circle of control begins to get better because it starts to come into the circle of influence. So as you demonstrate behaviours and language that are leadership behaviours and language, as you develop your skills to influence, to be able to advocate professionally for professions, what you'll see is that your circle of control starts to get bigger, and your circle of influence gets bigger. And that's the way that you start to reduce all of those other things that are going on that perhaps when you're starting off you can't see. I understand that in times of constant change, it really is very difficult to see what on earth you can control. And if you're working in hierarchy, it's very difficult to see how you can ever influence beyond perhaps your immediate work group. But starting here, starting with those things, with a very clear eye on what you can control, is absolutely the first step towards enlarging the way that you influence. Communicating change, kind of communication 101. When you are very busy, when you're in the midst of change, when you don't really understand why things are changing so much anyway, very hard to keep communicating. But put your energies in here. Do these things. Get ahead of the rumour mill. Walk the talk. So if you like to think of yourself as a pretty straight up manager that reflects the values of the organisation within which you work, then make sure others see that in the way that you behave. And manage upwards. I see that there's a typo. And manage upwards. Advocate for your staff. Communication is really important, and the delightful thing about having to pivot all over the place in 2020 is that there are lots of tools, lots of collaborative workspaces that you can bring to play to help with this. Use those collaborative workspaces, particularly the less formal ones, to talk about the change. Try and anticipate what's happening, particularly so that you can reduce the threat, the feelings of threat that people experience around those 5 SCARF elements. My last slide is about a resilience, and it's about the growth mindset. Now, I am sure that you will have spoken about the growth mindset before. I know that they speak about it at schools. You know, when your children are little nowadays, they say, it's not, I can't do that. It's, I can't do that now. And this is part of the thinking around resilience. It's that ability that I can't do it. I don't understand it, but I will understand it, and I will figure out the skills that I need to do it. Now that takes lots of courage and it takes lots of energy. So the other thing that goes with growth is self-care. So those things about, and I'm not necessarily talking about, you know, laying on beaches thousands of miles away from us. It's going to be 9 degrees here in Canberra tomorrow, so that's probably where I'm going in my head. But this is eat well, sleep well, get a bit of exercise. Those things help. They are the things that stop happening when you're really busy and you're caught up in this sense of not being able to control things. The other thing I'd like to leave you with this idea about a growth mindset. When I first came across the research, you know, as a formal research body, I went, well, duh, yeah, of course. You know, I'm pretty professional. I've been leading teams for a while. I get it. I understand about the growth mindset. But, you know, there is available a little self-assessment that you can do around the growth mindset. And one of the questions in that is, do you think that you can get more and become more intelligent? Or do you have the same level of intelligence that you're sort of born with? And I don't know about that. I think I might be a little bit stuck in that, well, you know, some people are really intelligent, some people are really smart, some people not so smart. You know, I don't know that you can change that. So I'll leave you with that thought, because that has been a really inspiring little question for me. You know, I like to think that I'm well in that growth mindset, but every day, I need to have a bit of a think, what do I need to do to ensure that I'm growing and those around me, I'm helping to step into a mindset and not feeling threatened by the change in the uncertainty that highly cyclical and volatile sectors put you in. Thank you very much. I hope that was okay and that it addressed the some of the things that you might have been interested in hearing about this afternoon. Are there any questions? I don't really know how I'm going to find out if there are any questions from.
We can see there's at least 24 people online, and then there's at least 14 things in the chat. So I'm sure there are questions. But before we get to the questions bit, let's all give Michelle a round of applause. And just because we'll get to the people online because we had someone dedicated to tending to them. Are there any questions from the room? Okay, I've got a question then, which is, so I really liked the stuff you showed by Dan Pink. I think he used to be Al Gore's assistant speechwriter back in the day. And his book Drive is one of the nicest books I've ever read about just improving your mindset and looking at how leadership could work in an ideal world.
Yeah.
But I say could work because many of the things around autonomy and mastery have a bit of a longer term, or require, I feel like, a longer term mindset. And given that we're so market driven or driven by these cycles of change, what do you have to say about trying to balance long-term versus short-term priorities?
Yes, thank you. That's a great question, and I might go back to the slide taken from Dan Pink. So it does take time, doesn't it, to be good at what you're doing, and even autonomy. Although strangely, I think what takes time in that autonomy piece is perhaps it takes time for other people to trust that you can be autonomous in the work that you're doing. So so let me just stay here with autonomy for a little bit. So when I first come into a workplace, I still want to be autonomous. I do want guidance, and I need you to help set up a safe environment so I can ask questions and when I'm unsure. But I don't really want you standing over my shoulder. So autonomy is something that you can give the people that you work with really straight away. You might, within that, I was thinking about the word guidepost before. When you're giving people autonomy, if you're in an environment of constant change, then talk to them about the variables that change. What creates such volatility in the commodities market? Those are things that are known. What causes governments to fund and defund projects? What causes things to change? And I think that goes a little bit to mastery as well. So understanding why is very important to people. So if we're doing this week, and then all of a sudden we have to change, I think to help people around mastery, you acknowledge the skills that were gained. You encourage them to think about the transferability of those skills, and then start again with the time, and let people explore and discover. And it's that it's safe to fail. Again, particularly within public sector environments and some dangerous work health and safety environments, there's not much of a tolerance for risk. But that just means that you have to structure the activities so that people can explore, they can discover, and they're not at risk of harming themselves or bringing down the government or the mining investment. So I think that it's awareness is what I'm saying, Anand. Yeah. So if you're, I think that it's awareness. And one of the skills that you can help people practice is its skill at pivoting, at being agile, at being responsive, all of those terms that are so much in the overused space at the moment. Talk to them a bit more seriously about them. Well, what does it mean? When the secretary said, when the head of your agency says, well, we've got to pivot, we've got to respond, we've got to learn how to be agile. What does that really mean? Because sure as things, if you ignore it, then nobody will get good at it. Yeah, that's my thinking anyway. Dan, thank you.
Thank you for that, Michelle. And Phil, if I could ask you to let us know if there are any salient points in the chat that you'd like to discover. I think we can hear you, so if you could just say something so that we can know for a fact we can hear you.
Yep. So we have to.
I can kind of hear you, Phil, but maybe I need to increase the volume. So hang on just a second. If you could if you could say something again, Phil.
So yes, we have two questions.
Yeah, so we can hear you fine in the room now. So if you could please take us through the questions on the chat, that'd be great. I hand it over to you, Phil.
So how do we manage burnout? Was one of the tools you spoke about today more useful than others?
Thank you. That's a really good question around managing burnout. There are two things that I would point to around managing burnout. And one is the importance of bringing your new brain into play around burnout. So I'll tell you what I mean when I say that. Often when we are working in these very complex, constantly changing cycles, very busy cycles, you go to bed and then you've got 100 emails when you wake up the next day. Sometimes what happens when you're working in that space is that you're actually being driven by that limbic brain. So your limbic brain is saying to you, you've just got to keep on top of it. You just have to keep managing this. You just have to keep churning out the work. You need to do this, you need to do that, you need to do this. And that's not very, even though I was saying your limbic brain is about safekeeping, that's not a very safe way to operate. So I think around managing burnout, what you need to do is to be really honest with yourself. So bring that critical thinking. Anything that else clouds your mind, like everybody else is working this hard, not everybody else seems to cope, I don't know why I feel so exhausted, that all of that stuff, all of that other stuff that goes on in your head is rubbish. And it's coming from your limbic brain, because your limbic brain is saying, you just got to keep going, you just got to keep going, because if I don't, I'm not going to produce something and then the whole shebang's going to fail. So I think, Phil, and to the person who asked that question, is bring your critical analytical brain into gear to manage burnout, to recognise it, and to just use a little bit of logic against it. So if you've been working 80-hour weeks for 6 months, then your logic, your critical analysis tells you that as a person, that's not sustainable. So bring that into gear in the first instance. And then you need to, so you're still thinking critically, well, what do I need to do? What kind of self-care do I need to take? Now, self-care, I kind of feel a little bit uncomfortable with words like self-care, again, displaying too much about my own. So I come from an area, I'm not an economist, but an area where we looked at economic growth and things were data-driven and all those sorts of things. So sometimes when I think about self-care or me time or whatever, I go, yeah, no, not really. But that's not what this self-care is about. This is about using your critical brain, understanding that you are in a position that's untenable and thinking really sensibly about what do I need to do. And using that critical analysis to shut down that limbic part of your brain that's just screaming at you to keep going, because it doesn't work. So the second element, I said there were two. The first one is bring your critical thinking to bear, and the two is then think about your self-care. And I really mean, that doesn't mean spending hundreds of hours at the local spa. It really means, what do you need? Are you not sleeping well? Are you drinking too much? What do you need to get yourself back on track? I hope that was helpful. Was there another question, Phil?
Yep. So what's your advice for those very introverted types, especially during these COVID times as they leave work from home?
I beg your pardon? In these COVID times as they
leave work from home. So they come back into the office.
As they come back into the office. Really very good question. I think the first thing that I would say is to be kind to yourself, to everybody. Be kind to yourself. Don't expect that you'll be, hosting 20 people meetings from the go. And if you're in an area where somebody asks you that, then find your voice. So having introversion preferences simply means that you get your energy from your downtime. and from being alone and from having that ability to reflect. It doesn't mean that you can't advocate or you can't public speak or you can't, doesn't mean any of those things. And can I, while I'm saying here, everybody who works in Geoscience Australia would know about Drew Clark, who started his very, very illustrious career right here in Geoscience Australia, ended up being the secretary of a number of departments and was the chief advisor to Malcolm Turnbull. Very illustrious career, and he would categorise himself as with very high introversion preferences. So I share that example with you to say that if you have very strong introversion preferences, be kind with yourself, but please don't confuse introversion, which is you get your energy from yourself, you need downtime, you need to be able to reflect. Please don't confuse that with not having as much of a voice as the loudmouth in your team. You most certainly do have that voice. You most certainly have that capacity. You might feel that you would like to reflect before you speak, then that's perfectly okay. Ask people, remind people to give you that time. It has been 2020 has been a difficult year, and I suppose it's been a little bit cosy to spend your time at home. The other thing I might just, I might provide a gentle reminder to for those who are finding it a little bit hard to come back to the office is that connections are really important for people. They're really important for people, and you might be the sort that gets enough of a connection through video, but there will be a little bit of a difference from being able to come back into the office. So perhaps use that as a little bit of a positive thing about coming back to the office. There will be people back in the office that you'd like to see. Take it easy on yourself, and remember that you do have a voice, and that if you need to remind people that you need time to reflect, or you need to read something before you can give your opinion on it, then please say that. People won't necessarily know that. And remember that moving back into the office, your limbic system will be viewing as a threat. And because it's viewing it as a threat, you're going to have lots of physiological responses. You might get headaches, you might have a tummy ache, you might have a sore throat that you haven't been able to kick for a month. Those are absolutely, I'm not saying they're not true, but they are linked to this response around being a little bit, or seeing coming back to the workplace as a threat. So know it, bring your critical brain into play to quieten down those voices, and remember that you have a voice too. Thank you, Phil.
So we still have some time, so maybe one last question, Phil. I'll leave it to you to judge which is most worthy of Michelle's attention.
Yep, we have one more question. So, question about autonomy and micromanagers. What makes a micromanager? Someone who has never been trusted in the past and feels compelled to follow suit? Or are we born to tell others what to do and we have to stop or learn not to through greater trust?
Nice question. I don't know what makes micromanagers. I suspect that it will have to do with a fear of failure, and it probably, for many people, it will probably come through having an experience where failure wasn't tolerated. So I am old enough to remember the home insulation program. So do you remember that scheme? It was a scheme that was, no, not Mr. Fluffy. This was a Commonwealth. It was a Commonwealth government program, and it was brought in at the end of the global financial crisis, and it was designed to be an incentive. Whether or not the policy was right, I can talk to you again at another time. But anyway, the way that this program worked was that insulation. So the people who put insulation into your roofs were given an incentive to insulate people's roofs, and it was seen to be kind of a green initiative, but also as a stimulus to the economy as well. It was called the Home Insulation Program. Anyway, it was beset with disasters. It was a terrible, terrible program. And really tragically, one of the outcomes of the program was that 2 young electricians, or actually they weren't qualified tradespeople, but 2 young men died as a result of being electrocuted when they were laying the insulation. So that was the program. The senior public servants that were involved at the program at that time, of course, were hauled over the coals and were involved in really very high-level inquiries about what had gone wrong during that program. I ran into one of those senior public servants some years down the track. I was doing some work with her and her team around ways that they could make the branch more efficient. And one of the complaints from the team, well, not even complaints, but the remarks that I was consistently hearing from the teams was, we can't get anything through her. Okay, it's like a bottleneck. She wants to see everything that we see, all of our emails, all of our documents. She wants to see all of them. And that was terrible. It was tremendously disruptive to the branch. They weren't able to get anything done. The members of the team felt that they were being micromanaged. And therefore were disengaging, they didn't feel trusted, they didn't feel like that, all of those things that happen when people are micromanaged. It's clear that the most senior person was doing that because she thought that was the only way she could prevent a repeat of the home insulation program and everything that had gone on after it. So I'm not saying that that's the case for everybody who's a micromanager. Some of us are just control freaks. Some of us really perhaps aren't self-aware enough to realise that people can express things differently, but the content is still correct. So it takes a really, pretty high level of self-awareness. So I think that I think in a nutshell, there will be issues of trust. And there will be issues of fear for the person that is the micromanager. So using all your best skills at having challenging conversations, and having a conversation with that person, perhaps not really to find out what they're fearful of, or but just to let them know, or just to have a discussion about how the work of the unit could become more efficient. Or perhaps you want to speak to them about what happens to you when you don't feel that you're being trusted. So it will come out of people's experiences, and not trusting as a result, and not trusting that they're going to be kept safe in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. I think I'd love to pick Michelle's brain on that question as to what she advised that particular branch head. But if you want such advice, I'm sure you can contact Michelle. And so thank you everybody for your attention. And again, a round of applause for Michelle.
And thank you. Bye-bye.
Right, so at this point, I will now shut the meeting, and thank you, ASEG people behind the scenes, for your help. I think it has been a success, but thank you everybody again for your time and your organization. Bye-bye.